New video in the area, and this time bringing another very good work for you that involves mystery, powers, and zombies. But it is a lot of zombie, really a lot of different zombie. So if you like all of this, prepare that popcorn and let's go follow this work. And I'm here trapped in this yellow car and it looks like I'm dreaming, right? And you want to know? My name is Joe, but you can call me Time to Wake Up. And it still looks like I'm inside a dream. Ah, it's not a dream. That's because there's an ugly zombie walking outside again. This is getting annoying, these zombies. Yeah, it looks like something is wrong. Where the hell am I? Would this be one of her pranks? No, it doesn't look like it. She never made me go through this without a weapon before. Ah, there's something interesting in the back seat. Look, it's a sword. How convenient, isn't it? It's rare to find this in a world of apocalypse, but where have I seen this sword before? And suddenly gunshots were heard outside and our protagonist, not affectionate at all, kicked the door, destroying it. He ran to behind the car. Those shots were weapons. Facing the end of the street, he saw some uglies too. One of these zombies advanced blindly until its head turned into jelly. On the other side, some men were holding back zombies. A woman was evacuating the civilians from that area. Another guard warned his leader that they were out of ammo, and the leader was wondering where these monsters came from. Joe was staring at everything from the background, wondering why these people used such old military equipment. Would these armaments never disperse this horde of zombies? If he is to save them, he will risk fighting some high-level zombie, and he is in a very delicate situation now. The last shot was fired. Despair took over the big guy, who soon reported to his leader. He screamed the name of Chia quickly. She answered that she evacuated all the civilians from the area. Therefore, Chia was ordered to give support to everyone and eliminate as many enemies as possible. The other men advanced with knives in hand, and the first fool there was already bitten by the zombie. Very weak, huh? Chia was also very bad. She closed her eyes when she was going to shoot, and when she opened her eyes, she was the last one left and only had one more bullet in the magazine. She was alone and cornered. The zombies advanced furiously towards her. So, there was only one sensible option to take with the gun already pointed at her head. A loud metal noise was heard in the background. All the zombies turned in that direction. Those noises were from Joe's sword hitting the car. Chia terrified because she almost ended her own life and wondered who was the idiot who made so much noise to attract the zombies. And the monsters were furious with the sound and ran in the direction of the protagonist. Chia screamed that this was stupidity and that he should run as soon as possible, but her eyes widened completely because the protagonist's blade passed in front of the zombies, slicing them. The presence of those blows, the strength and speed were out of the ordinary. The girl was shocked, but at the same time was admiring the skills of this swordsman. Her team was eliminated so easily, but this guy alone was dealing with all the zombies without being bitten. He had defeated at least 50 enemies so easily. So who the hell was this guy? Joe stared from the background and took a good look at Chia. She was the only survivor left in this place, and some zombies were heading in her direction. He looked at the ground and saw one of the men from before already lifeless. So he thanked him and looted that small dagger he carried, and in a precise move threw that blade that flew toward the zombie that was in front of Chia, piercing its chest. That also caught the attention of the others that were already close. But he had already flown in the direction of that monster and used it as a springboard. He managed to jump over it and with absurd speed sliced all the monsters in the blink of an eye. Chia fell to the ground terrified with the appearance of this guy, and the protagonist struck that victory pose. He just recited that those zombies were too weak, and Chia was incredulous that someone called that type of monster weak. He just stared at her, warning that the team of the World Evolution Association cleaned this area, and as he completed this emergency mission, he wants to be rewarded with information and support. And she didn't understand a damn thing. And I also didn't understand a damn thing. We're together, Chia. She held our big guy, thanking for saving. But what did he mean by providing support? And that answer was pretty obvious. After all, he had saved her life, so he wanted some support in this world. But she just raised her badge, warning that she was the police captain of this city. Joe stared at that badge. It seems that this here had not been used for a long time, besides that this woman wore the old police uniform. Then he stared around and remembered that the apocalypse began with a horde of zombies. Then he soon asked what year, month, and current day it was, and she answered that today was September 3rd, 2021. This shocked our big guy inside because he returned 10 years in time right at the beginning of the apocalypse, when the era changed. On this day, 12 alien meteors called Destroyer hit several different parts of Earth. Because of that, many did not survive and at least 50% of humans became zombies. But not long after, an alien technology arrived in the world. Crystals that evolved humans. Joe also went through an evolution from a crystal, but different from the others, he did not gain superpowers, but rather a physical fortification, but widened his eyes. No, this is your true ability, because in the future you had died. So he returned 10 years in time. He trembled with happiness, because he returned 10 years in time with his body strengthened, as it was in the future. So what should he do now? But his thought was interrupted when Chia pointed in the other direction, because a light was getting much stronger in that area, and that is exactly it. That was the area of evolution. The first of the 7 great areas of evolution in the world was in West Asia. Chia was enchanted with all those lights, so she called the captain stating that his name is Joe and he is just a university student. But of course that didn't work. After all, he had incredible skills to demonstrate. So she asked for his student card, soon pointing in the direction of his car that he ended up forgetting over there, and of course the captain did not believe at all that this guy would be a student. After all, why would the student also have a car? So she pointed at him, telling him to stop lying, and because of the skills he demonstrated, she called him to take part in his secret mission. But our big guy went to his car and grabbed the card, showing that indeed he was just a common university student, and then took his document from the hands of that girl. He just stated that they had to get out of there as soon as possible, and in an impressive way he turned the car that was overturned on the street and waved goodbye. "We will meet in the future." Chia was upset because that was her car and she wanted to go along too, but he warned that the place he was going was very dangerous and she just swallowed hard, not knowing what to answer. After all, the student was hiding many things, but she stated that as he was just a civilian, her mission as a soldier was to save and protect him, and because of that she would follow him to this super dangerous place. But the protagonist just closed the door in her face and the poor girl threw herself at the window begging to get in. And Joe stayed there with the biggest dumb face looking at her from outside, until he started to open the window little by little, asking how to drive this car. Yeah, it looks like our boy is not that good after all. So minutes later we were at full speed. This was one of the old military vehicles, and that is why our big guy had no idea how to drive this. And Chia just gave that mischievous little smile. After all, she is a soldier who really knows how to drive cars. And the protagonist just turned to her in silence. And she turned embarrassed, wondering why this guy was staring, and stayed silent for a long time. It seemed she wanted to talk a lot, but was getting more and more scared and embarrassed by the boy staring all the time. In the middle of the way, the protagonist just asked to stop the car, and she braked with all she could, and he just got out without saying anything. He also told her to get out as soon as possible. That is because he had learned to drive now, that way the poor girl went to the passenger seat. He just apologized for doing this, but because of her speed they would be late. She did not really understand why he said that, until she stuck to her seat because of the high speed of the protagonist. He shot off at extreme speed, told her to hold on tight because they would arrive already, and I have never seen them drag so much just to make a short stretch by car. I am irritated and I will go drive for them. On the way, Chia was loading her ammunition. She was doing this because what awaited them up ahead seemed to be dangerous. The protagonist on the way ran over several zombies. That made poor Chia get all unbalanced. But she was fast, so she managed to catch the ammo in midair and asked the boy if he really knew the path they were taking, if by chance he lived in these areas or had relatives here, and Joe just answered that he has no one. A somewhat impactful phrase for the girl. She soon warned him not to worry because they would find his family, believing he had lost his family in the middle of this catastrophe. She also pointed out that the lights that were in the north started 2 hours ago when those zombies appeared around the world, and she was right, because this light symbolized the beginning of the era of evolution. The protagonist asked what the exact time was and she answered that it was 4:50 in the afternoon. That sped up our big guy even more, because at 5 o'clock sharp is when the evolution of everyone in that area would begin, so now they will need to change route to arrive as soon as possible. She was wondering how they would change route, but it was a very complicated question because our boy turned the wheel completely, invaded the other lane with full force. She just pointed out that up ahead they could not pass because the entire lane was taken by zombies. Joe questioned if this car had weapons by chance. And well, it did, but why the question? But she soon understood with a scared face because hundreds of shots were fired at those zombies. They were being obliterated by so many shots. Joe was using the weapon that was attached on top of the car, and for sure he was having a lot of fun firing at all the zombies in his direction. Chia knew that the car would not hit any zombie because they were all falling down. From the outside, the protagonist told her to step on the gas as soon as possible. But there was a problem because there was a very sharp curve ahead. But he just told her to trust and keep going as fast as possible. With not many options, Chia just accelerated even more. Pedal to the metal with full force. This time the car went over all the zombies, running them over. But as the curve was very tight, she just went straight on the track, and when it started to fall off that bridge, the time was exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Then that green light shone even more intensely in the skies. The whole city was taken over by that light of evolution. The car they were in started to float, but gravity was not so friendly to them, and then the car fell. However, it ended up falling into a sand field. Chia was the first to get out of the car, and soon asked what had happened because everything turned into a desert. And soon after it was answered that they arrived at the right time, and the protagonist just stared at the direction of that shining light, because in the middle of the city was the Sphinx and the pyramids of Egypt, and Chia could not understand why the hell this was here. Then a warning was given that a very intelligent civilization was activating its plan. Then the area of evolution was formed around them. The area in which they were encompassed was from Egypt. Several people were around and on top of buildings as well, and the mission was given to all the people that they should absorb the evolution crystal. This voice was transferred directly to the brain of all the people who were in this region. They had 3 missions: defeat the guardian of the crystal, Number 2, they needed to be at least 5 minim from the crystal. And number 3, they needed to have a minimum number of survivors around. It seems that the rules of the first area did not change at all, and this made the protagonist very happy. Some people screamed, not understanding what was happening in this place. In the background, a bus was coming at high speed with several zombies around it. It passed by our protagonist at high speed. One of the zombies put its hand inside, almost pulling the driver, and this one slammed on the brake. And the bus went straight into a green wall that was there, just collided, completely crushing, and leaving the bus without moving afterwards. Several people were inside the bus screaming for help, and Chia was going to help them. The protagonist told her to run to save the people who were there. Then the two went towards that bus, but it seems that while they were running towards the bus, that sphinx right in the back, exactly that sphinx, was staring at them with its little eyes. The driver seemed that he was not in a good condition, and a zombie was staring at him with loving eyes. The same thing entered inside the bus, and suddenly a person was pushed onto the zombie, and those ugly ones were asking another girl to defeat that zombie with a friendly face. The beast rushed at this girl, the three began to despair and scream, but the zombie ended up biting a metal because the girl stuck an iron bar in the monster's head, but she had no strength, and with that the other girls began to help pushing. But the strength of the zombie was much greater, and he was holding on until one of the girls looked outside and screamed, terrified, because they could not stay there anymore, because at the door another zombie was also entering. She screamed in despair when she saw this. Then she grabbed the arms of that monster and threw him to the side while running out of the bus. She just ran away, leaving her friends behind. The first zombie managed to get rid of the iron bar. Now the situation was disastrous, and the bravest girl ended up with a certain fear in her eyes, until she saw the glass being destroyed in front of her, and the presence of Joe entering with his foot in the zombie's face, and the beast that had run towards the girl ended up having its head pierced by the sword. The protagonist just appeared in a totally surprising scene, and the girl was admiring all that, but at the same time screamed at him because right behind our boy, that other zombie was rushing at him, but he was much faster and managed to dodge. And without making any effort, he performed such a fast and beautiful maneuver with his blade that sliced the head of that monster. In this way, he eliminated the two zombies that were in this bus. It seems that the girls were now safe. Joe stared at that student, and it seems that her face was in a certain way familiar. The girl just thanked for the help, and at that moment Chia came in, questioning what was happening there. But when seeing all the monster bodies on the ground, she understood the situation and warned the girls that she was the police captain, and that the girls should follow her. The other two said that there was one more girl who ended up running away, and Chia ended up being very astonished because outside the situation was very bad. The protagonist also looked outside the bus and saw the ugly one running from the other direction, but a gigantic shadow hovered over her, and the girl trembled with fear once again when she saw this, because right above was a big foot and she was crushed. All those who were inside the bus ended up screaming the name of the friend. Even Chia went to look outside to see what was happening, and it seems that that Sphinx was walking. The whole bus was shaking from the footsteps of the Sphinx, and she seemed very thirsty for what was inside that bus. It came very close to the door and screamed loudly, causing a huge vibration. The ears of everyone were about to explode. The protagonist noticed that this should be the guardian of this area. It would not be such an easy fight. One of the girls was panicking. She did not know what else to do, until the protagonist told her to stay calm, grab a book, and start studying. Chia also asked why they would have to read a book at a moment like this, and at that moment the claw of the Sphinx pierced through the bus, but everyone was in their seats, just reading books. Meanwhile, the Sphinx was tearing the roof of the bus and staring at the content. The eyes of this monster shone even more. Then it carefully approached the bus to see what they were doing. Not far from there, the men were already saying that those who were inside the bus had already met their end. And the protagonist was also reading a little book, and he was very interested in what was happening. Thus, a kind of sand began to form around the bus. That's because the Sphinx was distancing itself from it. The people who were far away could not believe that the monster simply abandoned its prey. The beast simply turned its back and started walking to the opposite side. At this moment, the protagonist finished reading his little magazine. He told the girls to stop reading it too. There was no more need. Thus, everyone looked outside trying to understand what was happening. Chia also asked how he knew that the monster would go away just by seeing them reading books. And he only replied that the monster will not attack for now and asked them to remember that voice that appeared when they entered the evolution zone. The first notification was the perception of God's character. Joe praised because that there was the protective statue of God. He also explained that the Sphinx will give a riddle asking which monster walks on 4 legs in the morning. In the afternoon it walks on 2, but at night it will walk only on 3. Chia asked what this had to do with it, how it could help them. Mina knew this story from the ancient era of Egypt, and the protagonist replied that they were all right. That's why they needed to show knowledge to the Sphinx by reading the book. But he ended up realizing something, that these books belonged to the people who were in front of him. At that moment he remembered that the face of this girl was really very familiar, and from staring at her so much the girl blushed, asking what Big Brother was looking at. In the initial era, Mina was one of the few people who managed to evolve completely. She gained the title of Empress of the Storm, managing to use multiple elements in her ability. That is, she managed to become so strong because she managed to find one of the first crystals that fell in this world. Mina was calling for our boy who was already lost in thoughts, and Chia seemed to understand a little how to fight that Sphinx. But the protagonist warned that they needed to get the evolution crystal, otherwise they would not live in this new world. And as it was already getting dark, they needed to leave this place. There was a lot of blood around, and the zombies would attack this bus. Besides that, he managed to see that there were 5 people with binoculars staring at what was happening in here. Chia asked if this by chance was something worrying, and yes, it was very worrying. They had to fulfill the requirements of this area to obtain the evolution area for all the humans who were there. They do not need to eliminate the Guardian, but a certain number of people need to disappear for the mission to be complete. The girls immediately understood that some people would need to be eliminated for this to happen. Issa still warned that in the apocalypse people could be more dangerous than the zombies themselves. The other 2 ugly ones back there asked to be sheltered by our protagonist. He only agreed after all their presence was too weak to attack other people. That way our little group left the bus eliminating the zombies that were around. Defeating zombies in the middle of the night and in the desert was something wonderful, because they made no noise. The protagonist warned that they were going to a small market that was in the center of the city, but Chia warned that the market was closed, they could not buy anything at that hour, and just called her silly, because he wanted to buy his little Coke in the middle of the night, and also because a tiny little market could supply the resources for this small group. The neighborhood market has only 2 exits, enabling a faster escape, and also does not have windows, which would make the zombies not notice that they are inside. Mina kept praising our boy for being strong, intelligent, sane, healthy, and so on. Chia replied that the first time she met Joe, he had defeated 50 zombies at once. At this moment, the protagonist stopped. It seems that there was a presence on that street and everyone fell silent. She warned that the little market was just ahead, but yeah, he told no one to advance even a single step. Then he started walking alone. While stepping on the sand, he could feel the surroundings. It seems that something dangerous lurked in the shadows, and really it seems that the nemesis was there. Then he opened his eyes and stared at a car that was just ahead. He told it to stop hiding and come out. At that very instant, the car went flying up. The girls widened their eyes when they saw the scene, for a big monster came out from under the car, and I wonder how it was hiding there. Chia pulled her pistol, telling Joe to get out of the way, and he only told her to save ammunition. It would not even scratch this monster. The beast had already thrown that car in Joe's direction, who needed to dodge going down, and the car passed close to his head. He shouted that the noise of the battle would attract the other zombies and they should protect themselves. The nemesis roared once again loudly, and Z questioned if this was a mutant rank, but no, it could not be yet. The nemesis jumped on top of our hero, but ended up hugging a car that was right behind. The girls screamed the name of Joe, but in less than the blink of an eye, he reappeared on top of the car, calling the monster for the 1v1, and the guy was kind of freaked out and yelling and drooling everywhere. Again, he charged with brute force and almost hit our big guy, who jumped over him. Nemesis seemed to be irritated not being able to catch his prey, and Joe was only mocking that beast. Chia was scared because with just one touch the monster could destroy a car, and it was impressive that our protagonist could dodge this monster. It seemed he was zigzagging with him between the cars. Our protagonist managed to jump on another car, but Chia noticed that was a very bad place because there was nowhere to escape. And Nemesis jumped on him once again, yelling very loud. He even opened his big arms, waiting for a hug from the protagonist, and when he was face to face, a blade thread passed before him. That completely cut Nemesis's arm, and Chia wondered why our protagonist had not used the sword before, and also why he was staring at the sword since that Nemesis had not been defeated. The big monster was screaming loudly in pain, once again charged, this time with a lot of rage and without his right arm, and when he was on top of the protagonist, our boy was in a totally different stance. That was Lai's posture, and then he passed the thread of his blade before Nemesis, who for a moment didn't understand and looked back, but his head was completely deformed to the point of exploding, and Nemesis finally fell to the ground already lifeless. The girls couldn't react, they didn't know who was the real monster there, and Joe was feeling something enter inside his body. He was feeling stronger with more energy. It seemed it was an evolution crystal. His fortified physique, which before was ranking D, now seemed to be ranking C after many years. The girls came closer asking why he didn't defeat that Nemesis at the beginning. He answered that it was not that simple. Just look around the battlefield. They looked everywhere and also stared at Nemesis directly. Chia seemed a little scared, but that didn't count for Mina. And the protagonist understood why she would become the Empress in the future. She could perceive the environment and the enemies that fast. Then he pulled her by the hand, warning that he would show what happened. Also told Chia to calmly approach the monster. They noticed the monster had a bone armor. It was an external layer that could protect from attacks, and Mina asked how that was possible, how his body changed so much. Joe also touched the monster with the sword, showing that he not only changed but became more powerful. And she heard that this noise was exactly like metal, and that was precisely why Joe told them not to use ammunition. It would not make sense. That's why he was dancing with this monster in this field. He was identifying its weak points. Chia understood all that, and that she also needed to report to headquarters about this type of monster. They needed to get out of the street as soon as possible, because that big guy was taking care of everything here, and the other zombies did not come close. Our little group was inside the market and several zombies were surrounding them. They lit a small candle to illuminate the environment. Inside there would be many resources to survive for a good time. Chia asked to stay in the kitchen and take care of all the food. After all, she was a soldier and knew how to deal with that. Issa asked if she really knew how to cook something, but in the face of all that just agreed. Then a few hours passed and she really prepared a banquet worthy of the iFood coupon. The protagonist was the first to try, and the moment he put it in his mouth he felt a phenomenal flavor. It was really amazing and he questioned what was this magnificent flavor. Then they gave him the anime noodles. In the future this big noodle would be very expensive within the black market and also a super special product, and Joe just went all in. Hadzim was in love with this flavor, something that left Chia not understanding. After all, Joe had the biggest hero pose, but now looked like a child eating. And really he was crying for tasting this food. And she was just worried, believing that this could be something else. She ended up touched, only managing to cry for Joe. Mina also wondered why all of them were crying just for eating. Thus, a few hours passed and they finished the little meal. Joe saw that there were fewer blankets than needed, so he just asked the other girls to rest in his place. But Chia ended up calling him before sleeping, and the two girls wanted to know more about the zombies and how he got so strong. And it seemed the night would be very long explaining to them. Then, after a brief explanation, the two were terrified, asking if that evolution really existed. It seemed our protagonist opened up explaining about the evolution areas and what they would do to humans. But the zombies also gained different species of evolution. They had the Wanderers, which were the first levels, the Mutant rankings, which were those they saw outside, the Terror level rankings. Then came the Disaster ranking. Lastly, the Catastrophe ranking. Those outside were Wanderer level, but if time passed and they managed to evolve, they would gain much more strength. The one he defeated before, in fact, was a unique type Wanderer. He evolved in a different way, and Chia questioned if humans could really survive an apocalypse like this. The night ended up passing. Our little trio was outside the market. The girls were somewhat scared, but each one was holding a kind of weapon. That was because on the previous night the protagonist explained that humans, just like the two, could indeed evolve. They needed to go through experiences, and also the evolution crystal would affect them. That's why he gave the mission that the next day they would approach the crystal and also defeat some zombies. It was at that moment that the two girls opened their eyes wide because they wanted to evolve too, except the two ugly ones, warning that all of this was very dangerous, and because of that he just told the two to stay inside and protect this place. Not many minutes after they left the shelter, they found a zombie walking through the streets, but he stopped them from advancing because this one was very big. So he personally eliminated it with a strike to the head, and when removing his sword he faced the monster's body. The girls only followed along. That was because Joe was very strong. He faced the horizon and saw some weaker wanderers, and warned that those two over there would be the girls' prey. Chia was ready, but it seemed Mina still had a certain fear. She asked herself if perhaps he wasn't asking too much from a high school girl, and he just affirmed that she could go all out, that he would give support in case something happened. By saying that together with some motivational words, she ended up getting inspired. She knew Joe would become a leader in the apocalypse, so she could not disappoint him. The zombies stared at the girls and started running toward them. Chia was the first to enter combat. She managed to grab the monster's arm and, using her techniques, immobilized it on the ground, and quickly her knife pierced the monster's head. Then she breathed relieved that she managed to finish this beast. On Mina's side, the monster was walking in her direction. She managed to dodge one part of the attack and the other attack too, and her eyes were those of a cunning hunter. And with the right opening, she managed to stick her staff directly into the zombie's head, but that was not enough, so she put even more strength and drove the staff through the monster's mouth, which only kept writhing on the ground in pain. She was also already very breathless from the strength she needed to use. The protagonist understood how she was feeling, but told her not to blame herself. And was it really strange for her to end a life? The protagonist understood, passing his hand on her head, affirming that even though that there was a zombie, one day it was also a human, and told her never to forget that feeling. After all, in the future that would make her stronger. The sun began to rise on the horizon. The protagonist just told them to keep walking. Chia knew they needed to reach a high place to observe the whole situation, so pointed toward a building, and they had to climb that building to be able to look at the horizon. And when they climbed, Chia asked him, why didn't they go to a bigger building? And the protagonist answered that downtown was taken by young people and also many zombies. Also told her to face that direction, and that was exactly where the Sphinx was. And not far from it was the bus consumed by fire. She was startled because the bus they were in was completely in flames. It seemed that someone was hunting this team, and since they didn't find them, they set the bus on fire. Chia asked who it could be, and the protagonist warned that soon they would meet such a person, then pointed in another direction of the city. Something was moving toward the crystal. It seemed to be a group trying to steal what was at the center of all this. And at the top of the pyramid, that crystal was shining intensely in gold. The people around could observe the great shine that emanated from the top of the pyramid. Chia asked if that really was it, while the crystal inside the protagonist began to react. This symbolic evolution crystal had never appeared before for him, and it seemed the people who were heading toward it were some bikers. They faced a sphinx, but it was completely still. Then they yelled that the sphinx wasn't even moving, so it was the right chance. They accelerated their engines even more, passing through the desert, and their leader just affirmed that they would take the crystal and dominate the world. Chia was worried. Bad people would take the crystal. One of the bikers threw a batch of dynamite that exploded on the monster's head, and it seemed it didn't like being hit with dynamite at all, so much so that it roared very loud, shaking everything around. A certain sand formation began to be created around that other sphinx that was still standing still. One of the men shouted that one dynamite was too little, they had to use more. Then right after they threw another batch that also exploded on the monster's head. One of the bikers ended up shouting, asking why there were more sphinxes there, and in the middle of all that sand another formation ended up rising too. One of them ended up shouting that the one they hit was only a fake sphinx, and it seemed the big monster was right in front of them with that mischievous little grin. The remaining men started opening fire on the monster, but it seemed those shots were not effective at all against that huge body. Chia was impressed that those men had guns and kept throwing several dynamites in its direction. And with this new explosion, the little guy was really happy, believing it worked. But that big monster only shook its head like a little dog and went back to being completely fine without a single scratch, and once again gave that mischievous little grin toward all the men. And the guy got depressed because it seemed that he did not have a single scratch from that monster. The others yelled that they had to run away from there as soon as possible, so they quickly hit the road on their bikes, but it seemed that the monster would not let them escape, so it hunted them. Whoever was farther away was watching and asking how they could defeat this monster. And Chia asked what they could do now, but when looking to the side, where was Joe? Then they faced the horizon and saw him on top of a bike that he probably must have stolen from one of those men. He was simply crossing the desert at high speed and faced deeply that sphinx. In the background, some people were asking who that crazy guy was that was going against the monster, and Joe just accelerated even more. His focus seemed to be that pyramid. Then he stared better at that base of the pyramid, saw that it had a ramp, and began to accelerate even more. That big monster faced our big boy going at maximum speed in his direction until he stopped, stared at the sphinx and told it to come at him, and the monster did not understand that much but just narrowed its eyes. But in a way that curiosity turned into anger and it went toward the protagonist, who was far away, just called our boy an idiot for trying to face a monster of this size, but had full conviction that Joe would not do something stupid. The monster's paw was already going toward our protagonist, who began to draw his sword, but it was not to attack but to stick it into the ground. And with that strike on the ground, he managed to jump together with the bike and accelerated even more, burned the tire on the sand, then passed underneath the big monster. Everyone around was impressed that the boy was still alive. The sphinx opened its mouth and an incredible aura was formed. All the sands were gathering in one place, and several sand lions were created under the sphinx's orders. And they too were hunting our protagonist, who just looked at the horizon and several monsters were chasing. It seemed that these smaller lions were faster than the sphinx itself. The people did not expect that big monster to have so many abilities, and the protagonist kept accelerating to escape from these smaller monsters, until he began to break the bike and stopped it completely. The man far away was impressed, and Chia also incredulous at what he was doing, because our hero turned his attention to the monsters, and while he was accelerating, he performed that L stance, and quickly managed to slice the monsters that were in his direction. And the little group there was asking who the hell was that guy? Not even Chia could expect that he would do a move like that on top of a bike, and the pyramid right behind was shining even more intensely, including the aura of the giant sphinx itself. At that moment, something seemed strange to the protagonist. It seemed that someone was watching him closely. Then, he looked around and saw that that monster was losing patience, and began to accelerate even more toward Joe. The girls noticed that that monster was much faster than the last time. On the way, oops, a dynamite on the ground. Of course I will take it. The protagonist grabbed that dynamite tightly that no one expected to be there. Not even the people who were in the building expected a dynamite. Quickly lit the dynamite in his hands, and the sphinx just gave a smile. It seemed that it already expected this. But contrary to what it expected, the dynamite was thrown toward the pyramid. The sphinx's eyes just widened and a big explosion happened at the pyramid's base. That opened a kind of station, something that shocked everyone, because that was the entrance to the subways. Without wasting much time, our big boy headed in that direction, saying goodbye to that monster. That way he managed to enter inside the train station. The girls were relieved because it seemed that Joe was now safe. They were happy that everything worked out in the end, but were worried because they managed to see several groups that were watching Joe. And with the incredible performance he made, managing to escape from the monster, probably the bad people who burned the bus before will come after them. They need to get out of this place quickly, move as fast as possible to the market and stay safe. Not far from there, a man warned that they had found the people from the bus. Then a man with a scar asked if he was really sure about that, and yes, he confirmed, saying what those girls looked like. That was good because the scarred man wanted to capture those girls to be able to get the attention of the guy with the sword. Then he yelled for his men to capture the two girls, and only then could they get help from that man. Minutes later, we go to our girls who were running at full speed. Chia gave the idea not to draw attention and go through a simpler street, but there was a problem, or a less busy street. There would also be more dangers because they could not escape. When they arrived at the street, they saw something strange. Mina felt a huge chill when she saw that door. Chia too, but at the same time a loud noise started behind them. That loud noise was a man on top of a bike yelling for the two girls, and his little group was investigating that area. It seemed that they were his targets. Chia just stared deeply and saw the scarred man along with those guys, warned Mina that they did not have much time and needed to run now, but the positive side is that now they were in an alley where they could hide. Again stared at the surroundings and asked Mina not to make any kind of noise. That way the girls began to walk silently, but at the same time quickly. While they were walking, a door began to make a lot of banging noise. The scarred man who was on the street next door suspected, and Chia just stared at her companion, who just shook her head saying it was not her fault. One of the men yelled that it must be the women, they should go there to capture them, and the two girls just stared desperately at the scene. Going to our big boy who was running through the train station, he asked himself why that big monster outside suddenly got stronger. This place was much more difficult than an initial evolution area. So, how did Mina manage to obtain the evolution crystal from this area? Maybe the whole problem is not in her, but rather in himself who is here. Those horrifying eyes that stared at him before seemed to be from someone very powerful. Besides, his crystal also absorbed that shell zombie. He stopped the bike while wondering if this being was by chance treating him like a zombie too. The abilities were given to humans to fight against zombies. Do you know that the one who stared at him before was the second guardian that was hidden inside the pyramid? It seems he managed to fully understand this place. The positive side is that the lights turned on and all around him several zombies were also awakening. Then he just gave a little smile. Over on the other side, the scarred man was playing with his little coin, asking why his men were waiting so long. Should they capture the girls? And they were, in a way, thirsty to capture those young ones, until several shots were fired in their direction. Chia yelled that she was a police captain and had authority to kill people from now on. In a way, the men were afraid to hear this, and Chia also stared at them with a certain tension in the air. And the scarred man asked if she would really scare bandits like them, just with a little speech like that. Right behind, another man began to give support, shooting a lot at the girls, but he shot so badly that he missed all the shots while the dynamic duo managed to escape. Chia was giving support so Mina could escape, while the men in the back were loading their weapons, and Chia seemed to have given her last shot. At that moment, Mina asked if they would meet their end, and the scarred one warned that that girl was already out of ammo. The men started laughing very loudly because it was the perfect chance to capture her, and the two girls just looked tensely at this gang of men. But suddenly they began to hear a very strange sound around. This seemed to be the sound of a motorcycle arriving. And right above the building, the bike of our big boy arrived. He came running over the first of the guys, and only a very loud scream was heard, and another scar on the other side got scared by this. And looking better at that street, the men began to move away little by little, and who was in front of them was our Joe with a downward gaze. The men screamed in fear because that man was the one who fought against the monsters. Right behind the girls said that these men wanted to capture him. Joe questioned why they were staring this way. The scarred man ordered him to work directly for him. His skills were very good and he would not waste them, and Joe asked if he would at least sign his work card, and well, it seemed that was not the case because he got really nervous. Joe just called him trash. After all, humans like them who in situations like this made others smaller were just trash. And the scarred man just pointed his gun, which by the way was very badly drawn. The protagonist kept warning that from now on everything in humanity was about survival and evolution, and trash like that guy and those other bandits would be extinct from the world. And the men around asked why the eyes in Joe's were turning red. And suddenly he simply disappeared in a crimson beam, something that scared everyone around. Then each one was severely struck. The protagonist's blade was passing in front of all of them. The scarred man yelled loudly that they should shoot as soon as possible, but the shots could not keep up with the speed of our protagonist, accelerating even more. He simply sliced without any mercy, cutting each one of his opponents. The leader of all of them was terrified, not understanding what kind of skill this was. The girls felt that Joe had returned much more powerful. Suddenly a jump was given and Mina faced his flank. It was the scarred one wanting to take them as hostages. Joe was too far to be able to help them, so they would have to deal with it. The leader and his closest henchmen were approaching, until the chest of the henchman was also pierced. Suddenly the leader also felt a great impact and dropped his coin and just fell to the ground, already unconscious. On the other side, one of the men who had a fresh haircut saw his gun disappear from his hands and his head also evaporated, turning into porridge. And who appeared from the back was our protagonist with a pistol in hand, saying that he also knew how to use weapons and warned the leader that it was better he had died with just one shot. The scarred one proposed a game. They should toss his coin and God would decide his fate. In a way, this was also interesting for our boy, and the leader of the bandits asked for his coin that he would toss it. But yeah, he was merciless and shot the man in the head. Truly, trash should not exist in the world. In the background, the girls ran in his direction and she apologized. The ammo she had simply ran out. The protagonist told her to be careful because the zombies would adapt to the sunlight very soon, and she understood now why that noise arose earlier. The sun began to fall and he warned that it was time to return, while the girls had picked up all the weapons. She warned that criminal organizations like this would return very soon, and the protagonist knew that, but things would get harder because of the adaptation of the zombies. And speaking of this little gang organization, the zombies appeared there still with sunlight, and it seems they had a feast eating and chewing all the little bandits from that area. Then we returned to the door of our supermarket. The protagonist, just like the girls, had just arrived home again, and the two ugly ones inside were happy that they finally returned. And Joe stated that they only returned because of an incident that happened. They also asked why they carried so many weapons and where they found all of that. But without answering anything, our big guy went to drink his little Coke. Chia managed to recognize that those weapons were from prison guards and also from police officers, meaning her companions. Probably those men killed many before. Certainly those bandits who were eliminated were very dangerous and would make more victims in the future. Chia, in a way, was starting to understand all of this and recovered from the first time she met protagonist when he only said that he was a member of the World Evolution Association. Mina asked what had happened to Joe inside the pyramid. He replied that he made great progress in there, and the biggest problem he has so far is that gigantic sphinx. And Mina agreed. After all, its body was very big and immortal. Joe just talked. They were not focusing on the right thing. After all, there is another sphinx on the other side of the pyramid. Chia knew about this because it is exactly the sphinx that is beside the evolution crystal. The protagonist told them to think a little better, and they wondered if by chance that body would not be fake, because at that moment when the bandits blew up the sphinx's head with dynamite, she was in a way very irritated. And Joe asked why the attacks also were not so effective, and Mina had observed that the sand took over the other sphinx. In other words, it was exactly here that they had to think. It is not as if the sphinx had a main body. After all, she can transform into sand. They also needed to consider the sphinx like those soda cans. The true vital force and regeneration of the sphinx was in another body, and Chia asked how they could defeat it. After all, the other body was immortal. But Mina connected all the dots. They needed to destroy both bodies at the same time. And it was exactly this that the protagonist wanted to get to. If they don't defeat both bodies at the same time, they will regenerate infinitely. And Chia, with her head bubbling from having to think about all of this, suggested bombing the entire pyramid. Maybe it is a better idea, but protagonist told them not to do that, something that left the girls very incredulous, asking why. And he replied that inside the pyramid there is a monster even more frightening than the Sphinx itself, something that left the two shocked and also with a certain fear in their eyes. Even those two girls also became terrified with the situation. Joe asked them not to worry because the guardian inside will not attack unless provoked. If they take too long to get the evolution crystal, the two guardians will start to massacre everything around, and the girls understood the gravity of the situation. As far as Joe remembers, only 3 people could evolve inside this first area, but the boys in the back, terrified, still said that they definitely had to get that evolution crystal. Mina understood that she needed to do this as soon as possible to save the people of this city. The protagonist had a plan but needed to do much of it alone, and Chia did not understand and got irritated with this because he had to do everything alone again. After all, he could count on her strength. Mina could also be counted on for this mission. The two wanted very much to help Joe since he was doing everything until now, and in a way he just lowered his head, giving an okay to them. Then he asked to hear how they would obtain the evolution crystal together. But before telling the plan, they needed to have a snack. Now yes, everything was prepared to tell about the grand plan, but he ended up thinking about everything that was happening with himself, even his red crystal that was changing. His body, which originally was fortified because of the evolution, was now definitely becoming stronger, but he knew that he needed even more power to face monsters of that kind. And after that snack he warned that he would go outside to kill some zombies and they would start the plan later. Mina wanted to go along to be able to reason some things better, and Chia also was not going to waste time running right after them. Right behind, one of those ugly ones appeared with the little salad, but the group went away. Thus, we spent the first day of the plan with protagonist killing several zombies, the second day with them getting a briefcase, on the third day blocking all the Machiavellian plans and making mask formula. During the dawn of the third day, everyone was already sleeping, except for protagonist who was very thoughtful about how they would do the plan. In the background, Chia also appeared. In a way, she managed to understand a burden that our big guy had to carry. He soon warned that if she wanted to ask something, she should do it now. And in reality, she wanted to know the true identity of our big boy. something that made him only stare at her and turn his gaze down. The atmosphere became a bit awkward, and Sena just said that this was not important. The best thing was to save the world. More important was that protagonist should keep his promise, that everyone would leave this place together. At this moment, he just widened his eyes and confirmed that yes, they will leave this place together. He will take everyone with him. Then tomorrow began to appear, and several men outside were shouting to return as soon as possible. They were afraid that the zombies could come out early in the morning. One of the men there, who was almost asleep, looked at the horizon and saw our little guy running with the motorcycle. It seemed that he really was courting death, running so fast like that in this place. But the leader of those men stared better. It was that guy he had seen previously and ordered his right-hand man to climb as high as possible to see that man. That's because protagonist was heading directly towards that monster, and out of nowhere, the big monster already summoned his lions. Protagonist prepared for combat, drawing his sword without any difficulty managed to cut them. This way a large cloud of dust was formed, and from all that cloud a dynamite ended up appearing that soon exploded once again in the head of the big monster. The man back there was wondering why that giant monster was not moving, and it seems that the Sphinx was quite tangled with this, huh? That's because several other dynamites appeared in sequence, and I wonder what kind of city is this that has so many dynamites. Several explosions in sequence were caused in the head of the monster. The leader of those men knew that this would not work and wondered what was the reason that man wanted to draw so much attention with those explosions, and our protagonist was heading towards the other Sphinx. When the first big monster came out of all that fog, it was with frightened eyes because the other Sphinx was being exploded too. Taken by rage, it stomped its foot on the ground. Although I gopfless Buttigrin judge in love. This caused a kind of earthquake, and sent a spear of sand that launched the protagonist's motorcycle into the air. From afar, that beggar warned that this could be a trap, but the protagonist, staring fixedly at that monster and with sword in hand, visualized a path he could make to the monster's arm. Thus he projected his body and accelerated at full speed in mid-air, raised his sword and managed to strike a blow at the arm of the big monster. And this time, in an impressive way, the beast roared in pain and a kind of black liquid came out of it as if it were the monster's own blood. This was Joe's plan to attack the smaller Sphinx so that this bigger one could not regenerate. But the monster was not going to let it slide and raised its paw. However, Joe put his hand inside his big coat and pulled out a weapon from nowhere and began firing non-stop at the Sphinx, which now was covering its own face. This way the protagonist managed to land safely. He looked at the destroyed Sphinx and there were 20 seconds left for it to regenerate. This was the time he had to continue hitting this big monster that tried to find our boy in the middle of the sand, but he had disappeared. That's because he had already jumped again towards the monster's face and with a horizontal slash passed the sword through its eyes. There were still 15 seconds left of regeneration. The monster was euphoric and going crazy, attacking everything in front of it. Joe managed to dodge and counterattack directly at the monster's arm, which with the lifting of its paws sent our boy flying upwards. There were still 10 seconds of attacks left, so he raised his blade to the skies and pierced the monster's back with a very heavy strike. This was such a deep attack that it completely shook the structure of this monster, which also roared in pain. But this was a very bad position for Joe. He felt that he could not completely pierce through the monster, so he pulled his sword and began traversing its body. There were still 5 seconds left. He jumped towards the monster's chest because there were still 3 seconds left, and in the final second only warned that he had won. But on top of that pyramid, the crystal began to shine intensely and his sword did not pierce the monster's chest. And it seems that our big guy's plan had not worked as expected. Then we are taken inside the pyramid with some zombies falling before the girls. Chia managed to shoot without closing her eyes, and they could feel that the monster outside was moving. Chia kept walking through the corridors with some fear, until she found the train that was right ahead. The leader of the beggars outside noticed that the first Sphinx had completely recovered. Protagonist, who landed on the ground, only imagined that this was the doing of that monster that was inside the pyramid. In any case, he will need to use all of his power. Then, a Kamezen aura began to emanate from his body while the big monster was regenerating completely, and it seemed that he was quite upset, so much that he roared loudly to the point of shaking everything. The aura of this monster was extremely overwhelming and hot, and the spectator there was just frightened because it was impossible to defeat an immortal monster. And this same monster was advancing towards the protagonist with blood in its eyes, and it was at this exact moment that he roared to Mina. This roar echoed throughout the area, and not far away was our big girl using a kind of remote control. She was guiding a drone that was flying over the head of that first Sphinx and dropped a dynamite right above its head, causing a new explosion, and shouted that she had managed to complete her mission. And the protagonist asked if the big guy there was upset about the destruction. That's because the true body of this monster is that one. But when it was damaged, the true body became the monster itself. Seeing that now he had to accelerate as much as possible, the protagonist pierced that big monster with his sword, and everyone around was impressed with this skill. And Joe stated that he would completely obliterate the Sphinx, and joked that this time it was not just a riddle, but the big monster turned with completely dark eyes. The man from afar wondered how this was happening, since both bodies were now destroyed, and it seems that this big monster was under the buffs of the pyramid, but at that instant noticed that something was inside there, and Joe gave a hint that he initially did not plan to destroy this monster. The true goal was to lure it here. Then he started mocking the big monster, and suddenly an earthquake began to happen across the field, and the protagonist made a sound effect of an explosion. That was because at that moment a train came out of the sands. The Sphinx stared at it, but it was not time to escape because the train pierced through her head, and this impact must have hurt a lot to the point that the Sphinx blacked out, and the protagonist just stared at the whole scene of the wagons falling in sequence. Mina was happy because so many days of preparation seemed to have worked. The zombies started coming out of the train station, and all of them were heading towards that big monster. At that instant, dark clouds and little carbon-like lightning bolts started falling from the sky, and it seemed the whole situation was getting better than the protagonist could imagine. At this moment, a tire started screeching on the sand. Chia appeared from inside the station announcing that the plan worked. Mina also confirmed this and got on the motorcycle. They had to go to the goal, which was the evolution crystal at the top of the pyramid. Joe was there on the ground destroying some zombies and just staring at the girls climbing the pyramid. He was wondering when those horrifying eyes would appear again. Did he know that this evolution area was special because it had 2 guardians? The Sphinx was already dead now, but he wondered why the second one did not appear. Maybe its abilities were effective only against zombies, and since his red crystal could absorb the power of zombies, maybe this second guardian treated him as one too. But even so, this guardian could not stop him from reaching the evolution crystal, and Joe started climbing the pyramid. Meanwhile, a horde of zombies was also chasing them. One of them even managed to grab Joe's legs. Tasatanar and Kazeta Tuidimord zombies at Sanjinin. Joe had lowered all of his aura so the second guardian would not notice, but right behind the zombies were also approaching at maximum speed. He managed to cut one of their arms, which soon fell down, and stated that those guys could not stop him and still continued climbing the pyramid. Now there was so little left to finally get up there, but he noticed that on one floor there was an open door and wondered what that was, until he observed a shadow coming out of that door. Then it could only be this one? This was the second guardian. He felt a burning pain inside his red crystal. His whole body was weighing a ton, but even so he needed to keep going toward the evolution crystal, for all those who had already sacrificed needed to keep climbing. The man in the background was finding it strange why the zombies were also climbing the pyramid non-stop. What was it about this pyramid that attracted them so much? And the zombies were walking directly into that door. And the moment they entered, a terrifying noise happened. It seemed that the second guardian was devouring all those zombies and absorbing their powers. It seemed that hole served for that. He absorbed everything and was able to charge the pyramid with more energy. Then Joe's body began to be pulled. His body was moving on its own, and he was heading toward that hole. That door was so striking and inviting. His eyes were completely hypnotized. He needed to enter inside. In the background, that man was screaming at our protagonist, but it seemed he was completely deaf too, and little by little he was getting closer and closer with that wave of zombies, and the door kept devouring everything that approached. The protagonist only stretched out his hands with the intention of going inside, but the scream of the 2 girls invaded his mind. They just screamed at him not to give up and that he should keep climbing. It seemed he was freed from that zombie hypnosis. The 2 reached out their hands to rescue him. Then they pulled him up. The man in the background screamed with joy that he managed to climb, and it seemed that everyone would be saved if those 3 could reach the crystal. And our protagonists were facing the evolution crystal that still shone intensely. They just stared at it with a sublime enchantment. Joe was feeling that all that pain in his body was disappearing near that light and said out loud that only 3 people were qualified to receive the power of evolution. Then he stretched out his hands, getting very close to that golden crystal, and grabbed it tightly. At that moment, a fire began to run through his entire body. Then he awakened. It seemed he was awakening inside his subconscious with an incredible aura surrounding his body. It seemed this was the moment he was gaining his own ability. It seemed he could extract the ability of a guardian. That was incredible, because if he could do that, he would gain the ability itself and become even stronger. That is, he no longer necessarily needed to fight to obtain a crystal, but rather be in the evolution area and be able to extract the ability of a guardian. And he recalled that the high-level evolution areas did not have only one guardian. That is, now he just needed to survive to collect as many abilities as possible around the world. Then he began to emanate even more power to extract, and in front of him, small sparks of flames formed. They began to grow even more and form small balls. These were the guardians from which he could extract their powers. The guardian of that door made his heart tremble with fear. The other one, however, was in a way normal. Then he decided to choose the Sphinx, and when he went to select this power, he saw that it possessed 2 incredible abilities. It seems that Kitha controlled the sands and the double clone, so he decided to take precisely him to gain his power. By doing this, a large orb formed in front of him, but this orb simply exploded, and it was not really what our protagonist was expecting. Those 2 abilities were incredible, but it seems that extraction does not work 100% of the time. But it is alright, there will be another chance to gain more power. That is because he also had the other extraction at his side. By selecting the other guardian, he saw that it possessed countless abilities. It possessed at least 20 secret abilities. One of those abilities was the Call of Death, which summoned all the zombies in a single direction. The other was the Explosion of the Spiritual Soul, which made his body move on its own and weigh a ton. Still, was it suspicious that this guardian had more than 20 hidden abilities? So he decided to touch it. He would extract its soul. By doing this, that orb began to grow even larger, and it seems that this time he successfully extracted the powers. It seems his range of abilities had increased by being able to extract the powers of this guardian. In front of him was the ability of the Explosion of the Soul. By selecting it, his entire body was burned by an incredible power. Then, an explosion of light took over that entire evolution area. The leader of the beggars was impressed by all that shining light. Even the ugly girls were smiling because of that light. The whole city went through a second of silence, until a great earthquake began to happen, and in a headquarters, a man reported that an explosive and grand energy had formed in one area. All the measuring systems managed to capture that energy. The men asked what the order was now, and Colonel Marcellin ordered everyone to stay in their positions. The man tried to argue, but the colonel just told him to be quiet and continue with the work. The colonel wanted to find out what was happening in the world. 7 mysterious areas had appeared. Then, in the protagonist's area, a great explosion of energy was occurring, and suddenly it dissipated as if it had shattered. All those strange areas began to disappear, and the city returned to normal. The protagonist opened his eyes, awakened in the middle of a street, and right behind Chia's voice asked where they were. It seems they managed to overcome that evolution area. Even Joe stated that they managed to and returned together, and Chia was practically crying because she saw her companion almost being controlled by that hypnosis, but he returned to normal and asked where Mina was, and protagonist stared from behind. It seems that the girl was passed out on the ground. She was burning with fever. It seems she was in a lot of pain, and Joe stated that it was normal when obtaining an ability, and Chia asked if by any chance she would return to normal. And he did not know how to answer because each person had a way of adapting, even more so if the abilities were very strong. Chia asked what ability our big guy had obtained, and he answered that he obtained the Explosion of the Spiritual Soul. It is an ability that could affect the mental spirit of other beings. Of course, he was not going to tell that he had gained a lottery ability where he could capture the ability of the Guardians. Chia understood a lot about this ability and asked for a demonstration, but the protagonist reappeared right behind her and again disappeared from sight and once again appeared in front of her. She asked if by any chance his ability would be something like teleportation. The protagonist explained that no, because when he affected her mental spirit, he could do whatever he wanted around her, and she would not even notice. The ability seemed much deeper than they could explain. Now, right behind, a hand appeared before the protagonist, but the entire body of that zombie was shredded. Our hero might have been tired, but still he was our hero. He warned Chia that they needed to leave there as soon as possible and go find the second disaster, and she asked what this second disaster would be, but he was scared because in the background the fragments of the crystal were attracting that entire order of zombies. He warned that this area would become very dangerous and they needed to escape now. They had to get Mina and take her out of this place. Chia lifted her body. The protagonist was also startled at this moment. Why? Mina's body began to levitate in midair, and he asked if that by chance was levitation. And yes, Chia had the ability of gravitational control. That left him in shock because it was impressive. An ability of gravitational control was simply very powerful. It could be considered the top of abilities. Chia questioned where they should go, and the protagonist warned that they were going to a military area to seek resources and medicine. Then they began running along with those other men, who were also running upon seeing that order of zombies, and it seems that it really was a crowd of monsters roaming the whole city. The men even had some melee weapons and managed to fight the zombies face to face. Their leader ordered them to run and not look back, and many of those men were just ordinary people. They were terrified because ahead of them a horde was standing still. It seems that they would not be able to get out of this region. The zombies were completely surrounding them. Some men began to be caught. The leader was a little scared because he thought he would survive after that area fell. In another place there were several soldiers. They were shooting with everything they had into a smoke, but they knew the ammunition was not that effective. They contacted HQ stating that monster could not be defeated and were also asking for urgent reinforcements. The colonel stated that reinforcements would arrive, but at this moment screams were given and then they lost the line with the soldiers. He also shouted to get more reinforcements and support for the front line. It seems that the colonel himself was personally going to the front lines and said he would no longer tolerate his men sacrificing themselves there. He needed to go too. This way we are taken to a horde of zombies. They were the same ones that were cornering the men from before. The leader was practically crying because he could not save his men. But in the background a great explosion was formed, something that made all the men turn toward the direction. It seems that there was someone there who could help them, and from the middle of all that smoke our favorite swordsman appeared. The leader knew who that was, after all he observed him along the whole way. The zombies continued advancing on those men, but at this moment the head of one of them was pierced by an axe, and that little guy there managed to survive for one more day. The leader raised his hand warning that they would be saved now. That horde that was approaching in the smoke observed Joe also walking slowly, and he used his ability of spiritual explosion, and all the zombies were hypnotized. The men realized that it was as if the zombies were afraid of that guy. Joe continued walking slowly toward the zombies, and the men were wondering when that guy would attack, until he disappeared from everyone's sight and one of the men said he was right behind the zombies. Then all the bodies went flying as if they had been sliced. It seems that this ability was very useful. After all, it made his enemies freeze. Right behind that group was approaching. The leader thanked for being saved by this man, who was also very powerful, and asked to accompany him on this journey. After all, they were weak. But before they could discuss this, a man warned that several zombies were approaching, and on the street right behind, a bunch of them were also coming. It was an endless horde, until a car was thrown on top of all those zombies. Several other cars were also impacted on the way. Poor owners of those cars, and the men did not understand why the vehicles were flying so high, and when observing the horizon they saw Chia carrying Mina and flying too. She warned that she blocked the path and the zombies would not arrive there so quickly, and the man was terrified because that one there was the swordsman's companion. She quickly approached our protagonist, and the moment she landed on the ground she got scared and dropped poor Mina in mid-air. Chia just flipped face first on the ground, losing all that hero pose. It seems that she still could not fully control her powers. Not far from there, more shots were heard. The soldiers were confronting a zombie that had a very rigid shell. They warned that they could not bring down that monster, and many others in the background also had even more rigid shells. The soldiers were despairing, trying to shoot everything they could, but that monster thing was extremely powerful. It seemed to be a mutation of the walkers. Then it managed to capture one of the soldiers and pierced his chest with its claws. The men were scared because besides being rigid, it was very fast. The biggest problem is that they also could not run from this place. That bison was shredding all the soldiers in the way. Besides that, there were other mutants around who were also defeating soldiers. There was even that one who was stuffing himself with Burger King, and the soldier gave him a gun to eat. And did he not eat it? He tore the gun in half and opened his big mouth to bite the soldier, who had already accepted that he was going to die now, but his mouth was pierced by the sword, and that sword was familiar. After all, it was our protagonist's. The soldier was impressed that with just one attack this zombie was eliminated, but he pointed his hand to the background warning that more zombies were coming. At that moment, Chia told her companion to flee, and he just grabbed the soldier by the collar and ran. That is because the big girl threw a truck toward the zombies and that same vehicle exploded. That truck seemed to be a fuel one that was thrown. The soldier looked terrified upward and stared at Chia, who now was sitting on Mina while levitating, and the protagonist just told her not to do that. After all, Mina had a fever and Chia put a bandage on the girl's head so she would not suffer so much. That seemed so stupid from his point of view. The protagonist asked where the colonel was, and he pointed in one direction, warning that he was fighting against a special zombie. Joe stared from the background using his special vision of the red crystal and managed to observe a golden point in the middle of all that. It seemed to be just a special zombie, nothing of mutant ranking above. Even if Colonel Marcelin had a strong body, he would not last long against that zombie. He warned Chia that he was going to leave this place with her, and ran in the direction of where the colonel was, and the soldier just stayed there without understanding anything at all of what was happening. Then we arrived in a restricted area and the colonel was running from something, managing to jump over a gate, and right in the back a kind of smoke was moving. This same smoke was running and destroying the gates which the colonel had jumped, and the brute force of this beast even made the plates bend. The colonel was reaching a factory and managed to get inside through that gap. That smoke was right behind and watched the whole scene. Marcelin pointed his weapon at the door and was waiting for the monster, and the steps were getting closer until the entire door was destroyed by that smoke. This aberration faced the colonel and started roaring very loudly, until the feet of this beast touched a kind of wire and several small grenades fell in the direction of the big monster, causing a successive series of explosions. And it seems that all that was left was just smoke. Or rather, the zombie was still alive. Marcelin managed to face the true face of this monster. Now and then opened fire. He shot non-stop at this monster, unloaded the magazine completely, even pulled out his knife and went in the direction of this zombie that was starting to release smoke again around its body. The colonel passed that blade directly on the neck of the monster, which just watched that blade coming. But the fist of the monster was approaching. The colonel dodged it barely, and his blade could not pierce the head of that monster, so he had to dodge. He felt that if he stayed a little closer to that smoke, he would be killed. And did he notice something on his face? A cut line because of that fist. It seems his head almost flew just now, but because of this distraction, the zombie managed to grab the legs of the colonel, and again raised its fist in the direction of his head. But Marcelin managed to block that blow with his knife. However, even so, he was sent far away together with his knife that was destroyed in half. His whole body was hurting. He could not move anymore. Meanwhile, that big monster was approaching with a murderous aura, and it was at this exact moment that the protagonist managed to enter this room. He faced the colonel in the back, already fallen. He knew the colonel because he was his first instructor. He remembered that once when he was on the verge of death, the colonel, even without an arm, came to save him from the middle of a horde of zombies. Joe had woken up and he was in the arms of the Colonel, who managed to save this child, and because of that, Joe started to train intensely with the Colonel and was training as much as possible because he himself could no longer enter a human evolution area because of his arm. And in one of the invasions, Colonel Marcellin stayed behind to save the younger ones, and after that the soldiers reported that the Colonel had an act of heroic sacrifice to save everyone, and this left our protagonist very shaken for several days. He remembered that it was at this exact moment that his instructor became crippled in this battle, but not today. At this moment the whole story will change. So he stood in front of the Colonel in a defensive position. The monster ahead was releasing even more smoke from rage, and he thanked the Colonel in advance for everything he taught in the future. But now he no longer needed to run from these monsters. He used the explosion of the soul, causing a great crimson beam on the monster. All that smoke was extremely irritated and jumped to the protagonist, who drew his blade and began to pierce through the big monster. This was the time for the protagonist to save the life of his instructor, and the Colonel asked if the boy by any chance also had a mutant body. Joe replied that this was not the case. He was just an evolutionist. The Colonel thanked for the help and questioned what the name of our boy was, and he quickly replied, the Colonel seemed to have a broken arm, but nothing that some bandages could not help. And when questioned, the Colonel stated that he came to this region to investigate a special area, and it seems that the special area he came to investigate was precisely the one the protagonist passed through. But before anything else, Joe revealed that they should not build a special base exactly in this area, because the zombies that were born here had a great chance of becoming specials or mutants. And he remembered that in the future this same military base would be completely destroyed by the invasion of special zombies. The Colonel understood the message and then was going to inform his headquarters. And at the moment he was talking with the HQ, he wondered where that boy had disappeared to, and outside the protagonist could hear that the Colonel was reporting the information. This was the best way to be able to help the military at this moment. Besides that the two girls also had special abilities now, and the instructor himself was now in shape, he could help a lot in human evolution. He interfered a lot in the story to be able to change the future a lot, and just gave a farewell to the city of Shang. We go to the other region, more precisely to a car, on the outskirts of the city of Dong. Some survivors were inside there. These two managed to get some supplies and were fleeing the cities. The woman soon warned that they needed to find a gas station to move on, but it was a big problem to enter a place like that, because it was infested with zombies. But even so they needed to try, but if they pass in front and see more than 2 zombies, they will escape the place immediately. No, many kilometers ahead they found a station. The woman asked if by chance it was still working. She could not see anyone inside. This man took a small butter knife and told the woman to watch. He did not want to be caught in an ambush, so he grabbed the fuel hose and found it very strange that this place was so quiet like that. Until suddenly a mist began to appear, and his foot was caught by the hands of a zombie. And the man gave a great scream, and I would also give a great scream. Look at the face of that unlucky guy there, ugly as hell. The man didn't even try to fight, he just ran away from that strange zombie. And the woman was inside the car telling him to run as fast as possible. But it seems that zombie was much faster. The man pulled out his butter knife, but the big zombie just slapped his hand and the knife flew to the other side. And she had a thirsty little face. She really wanted to eat this man, but at that very moment the man faced a red light passing by. That same crimson beam completely destroyed that zombie, and who appeared right after was our protagonist with a sword in hand, who without any difficulty managed to obliterate this monster. And the man on the ground questioned who this boy was, and Joe just answered that he was a worker. He was the manager of this convenience store. Then he poured gasoline on top of the body of that zombie, lit a match and created a big bonfire of St. John. He entered inside the convenience store, and the 2 characters were there. The woman asked why he was burning a body if that wouldn't attract the other zombies. And the answer was simple. The decomposing body would attract the others because of the smell of blood. The man introduced himself as Lima, and his wife as Nara, and the protagonist thanked them for their names and said that they were his first customers. And the man only managed to thank that this boy saved him, and he had several resources in his car that he could give in exchange. But the protagonist just looked back saying that he didn't need anything. However, he asked if he knew any new information that was circulating around, and he said yes because he had been in 7 of the 8 military cities in the region. Then the protagonist asked if by chance he saw the strength of the military in the battles around the cities, and Lima answered yes. The strongest city was certainly Zhang. They had eliminated all the zombies in the city and also restocked it with water and electricity. Did you hear that there are people with superpowers inside there? You may not believe it, but there is a woman who could control flying cars. They heard that she had the power of gravity, but even though the military force there is so strong, they didn't plan to attack the surrounding areas. That's because the climate of the region was very strange, with sun and storms in the middle of nowhere, and the protagonist remembered that this should be Mina's power. She should be awakening now. Joe just thanked him for the information about his brother, then grabbed a little cup of coffee for them too, and they said they were returning to their hometown to meet their children. The man stated that it was the second time they had escaped death, and the protagonist asked what was the first time. Then he answered that it wasn't very far, it was at the last gas station. When he refueled the last time, he heard the growls of a zombie and faced it through the mirror, but luckily managed to escape from that monster and get into his car and run away. Joe asked if by chance the couple would like to spend the night in the convenience store. The two just looked at each other in a slightly strange way, and Lima answered no. After all, they had to get to their hometown as soon as possible to meet their children. In this way, he only thanked for the hospitality of our protagonist and left. Joe was thinking about the other gas station. It was only one night's run from here, and by the dates it seemed that there were only a few days left for a new evolution area to appear. Then he took a car that was abandoned there at the station and went towards the area he needed. With his red crystal, he could observe the whole region and know where the zombies were. He arrived at the gas station and thought it was strange because that region didn't seem to be inside the next evolution area, but anyway, he needed to clean this area. Then he got out of the car with the sword already in hand. He could smell the blood around. Many people died here. Maybe the monster that is inhabiting here is still sleeping at this moment. He entered inside the convenience store and there was blood all over the place. He wondered why this zombie kept hiding. He faced a door that was right at the back. He could feel the aura of two creatures, and the moment he touched the door, a big monster came out to hunt our boy. This was only the first of the monsters, and with the sword in hand, he began the combat. He delivered the first blow to the chest of the monster, and in this way managed to escape before being attacked. The coloring of this zombie was different, just as its body seemed much more elastic. This was a rare mutant level type, and he told the big monster to get ready because he was going to eliminate it now. First he would tear it apart, and then go after the other that was hiding. Then he jumped towards that monster with a quick cut on the side, and this time his sword managed to pierce the body of this big monster. The skin covering its arm was also torn, and the monster faced it. But in a strange way, he was very scared when he saw the protagonist's sword right in front of him. And Joe performed attacks so fast and beautiful that he managed to pierce the monster completely. Its skin was completely worn out because of those successive attacks. Joe was thinking if this monster by chance would run now, but before it could do that, he pierced the sword into its head, and in a rather quick way managed to eliminate this monster. But he felt that the aura that was in that other lodging was much more terrifying. He kicked the door hard and burst it open. He was inside the storage, then looked around. Several zombie bodies were thrown to the ground, and a little girl was in the middle of all that. And that girl, she simply had no emotional reaction at all. Joe couldn't understand this situation. And what if by chance this girl had killed all those zombies? Maybe this little girl is an evolutionary. He will try to talk to her. He extended his hand saying that he was a friend from the other gas station, but the girl still couldn't speak. The protagonist asked if by chance she didn't want to take a bath. After all, her clothes were completely bloody. Besides, this place was very dark and frightening, and it seems that this girl went into a kind of shock, because she couldn't even speak. Then he asked where her parents were. At this moment she showed a reaction, and her eye almost cried out for them, and only said that her parents were sleeping in the room right behind. And the protagonist understood the whole situation, and asked what the girl's name was, and still insisted on knowing who she was. But the girl just told him to go away because he would simply disappear like the others. But the protagonist brought his hand closer, saying for her not to worry because this place was dangerous. However, the girl answered that she was also a monster, and that he should get away as soon as possible. Joe answered that she was not a monster, but an evolutionary. She asked what would that be, and Joe revealed that it is the same thing as her. He has the same powers and extended his hands again, affirming that they would walk together. And the girl then revealed that her name was Sasha. The two were in front of that door right behind. The girl warned that her parents were there, and the protagonist began to open it. Then he turned the bodies of her two parents on the floor. It doesn't look like they were killed by zombies, but rather by human causes. Maybe they died trying to protect their own daughter who was going to be turned into an evolutionary. Joe observed some documents on the man's shirt. He seemed to be the president of a large association. In the future, that same organization created several medicines for the revolutionaries. Now he knew that the founder of that company died in this room. On returning, he only told the girl that her parents would probably never wake up again. At that moment she understood and began to cry because of the loss of her parents. He only passed his hand on the girl's head, saying that they didn't die because of her, but the girl couldn't speak. She only cried and sobbed. Then she just fell into the protagonist's arms, and while he consoled her. Later that same night, our boy was performing a worthy burial for the girl's parents and only remembered several scenes of an era of chaos with extremely powerful zombies and with much higher ranks. They were memories of his past life tormenting his life. Then he just fell to his knees, remembering the people who sacrificed themselves so that he could live. At this moment Sasha appeared asking if something happened to him, but he only answered that he was remembering some bad things from his past. But now everything was fine, it had returned to normal. Then the next morning a sun shone. I knew that in this new world I could do things differently. Then he took Sasha with him to the other station, and there she was already having a big breakfast. In the other life, that same area had not been taken by humans, that is, the zombies got the evolution crystal. It seems that this area that is going to be created will be something very difficult to pass. He has no information at all about what is going to happen from now on, and it will also be very dangerous to take Sasha with him. But minutes later, she soon stated that she would go with him into the evolution zone, even with the protagonist saying that it was very dangerous to be in there. But she didn't want to be alone. But the rule was simple. She had to follow all his orders. The most important thing also is that she should protect herself alone, and ignore the plea for help from other people. It was strange for her to be able to ignore other people asking for help. He revealed that people can be more dangerous than the monsters themselves, so it is good to ignore them. And since everything was ready, they would enter this city at the beginning of the night. Hours later, a lightning bolt was falling directly on this city. It would also become an evolution area. Our two rascals were entering the city, and Sasha noticed that the city was very quiet, and the protagonist also noticed that this girl was extremely sharp in perception, and then revealed that here it was empty because of this huge hospital. Hospitals have a chance of having high-level zombies, so this wasn't a safe place. And she asked where they would go at this moment, and the protagonist made an extremely sharp turn in the middle of the street. They would stay in a clothing store, and the girl was delighted to see so many different clothes inside there. She wanted to go in there, but the boy warned that it was only summer clothes and now it was very cold. But even so, the girl went in there and was in love. They shouldn't edit and take all the clothes possible. Less than an hour later, our protagonist came out with the new look. Sasha too, without that bloody outfit from before. Joe asked if the girl was carrying that military dagger he gave her before. Then, she revealed that it was in her front pocket. This object she will always carry. After all, it was a gift. At this moment, an explosion happened in the center of the city. The two turned around because that was very fast. Joe lowered the girl's head to the ground. That explosion was the beginning of the evolution area. At HQ, the military saw that a sinister energy was forming in the city around, and it seems that they were already aware that these were called evolution zones. A voice spoke to all the people in this area that they needed to absorb the crystal to then be free. The girl asked if this really was an evolution area, but at the same time looked around her because it was daytime and now it was nighttime too. Joe told her that this was the effect of the evolution area. The weather could change, and indeed everything was changing. The zombies were appearing in greater numbers. When an evolution area falls, the zombies can also become mutant level and increase their own special rankings. The protagonist quickly drew his sword and began to obliterate the first ones. And Sasha saw that this guy really was amazing, but didn't need to worry because she could take care of herself too. And in an impressive way, the little girl also sliced several zombies. The two did this in the blink of an eye, and the zombies that were in the back in a way became frightened. And one of them became very angry. It was the special zombie who raised his hands and threw several spikes. Joe managed to defend with his sword, and right after that big zombie was coming with its mouth open. The protagonist stared fixedly and used his soul explosion ability. The two were face to face, but the zombie felt all the special ability entering its being. The protagonist was increasing even more the intensity of this ability. And that big zombie then began to tremble in fear, to the point it put its hands on its head and started shaking from so much pain. Joe, without wasting time, cut off the arms of that monster that ended up fleeing. And the protagonist revealed that that one seemed to be a guardian, but before anything he picked the girl up in his arms, because they had to run as fast as possible now. Then he put his legs to work and accelerated, completely destroying the street where he ran. The girl still asked why that zombie was different, what made it so special, and he revealed that that zombie was not special. It seemed to be the clone of the Guardian. Do you believe that all the shadows seen so far were puppets that were controlling zombies for the Guardian? The girl became worried because that Guardian had already noted the presence of the two. But yeah, he told her not to worry, because the most important mission of the Guardian was not to kill humans but to protect the evolution crystal. And from what he counted, this Guardian could not control all the zombies in the area. The girl pointed again to the street because something was strange. She didn't know that in this city there was a river crossing, but this river didn't exist there, it was a creation of the Guardian. And on the other side of the river, the zombies were taking a little bath. Some of them were becoming out of control. Then, they fixed their eyes on our protagonists. It seems that the Guardian of this place had already adopted them and was hunting. These new zombies charged at our little duo, and the protagonist pulled Sasha as far away as possible. They had to run. Not very far from there was a shooter in the building and he was exterminating the zombies that were in the middle of the street. He managed to eliminate most of them, and it seems that the coast was clear now, until the radio began to play and said that they found survivors in the middle of the street. There was even a child. Then he aimed his weapon to see. Before being able to enter the store, the protagonist was taken by that sensation of the Guardian staring directly at his crystal. This was a power that made him faint from pain. The protagonist just collapsed on the ground, and right behind them was that crimson shadow along with a horde of zombies. Sasha noticed that that one was the Guardian. She was trying to wake Joe up, but seeing that he would not defeat it anytime soon, she pulled out her knife. She knew she could not defeat that monster, but would try as much as possible. She needed to risk in order to succeed. Then she charged at the monsters, and again, like a fast beam, she passed through, eliminating all the zombies in the way, and got very close to the guardian of this place. She needed to stab her blade in the chest of this monster. But the eyes of this zombie shone very brightly to the point that a red mist appeared, and he disappeared in front of her. His body completely transformed into a shadow, and then with force sent the girl flying away, who only crashed against a glass wall and fell to the ground apologizing. Her body was very light, and she couldn't use strength. The boy felt that he was being controlled by that guardian and couldn't move. It seems that this guardian was attacking directly his crystal, so he would try to fight it with the very abilities he had obtained earlier. He used the spiritual explosion on himself to wake up. Sasha was getting close while crawling. At that moment, the protagonist stood up in Lee's posture and managed to deliver an immortal blow against the guardian, cutting off its head. It seems that he managed to escape that control of the guardian itself. He quickly went to the girl, apologizing for leaving her in that situation. But they had no time because right behind more zombies were advancing. But a shot exterminated both at the same time, something that left him open-mouthed wondering if by chance it was the ability of an evolutionary. And right there at the door appeared this little guy telling them not to enter that mall and that they should follow him outside. That was rare. In the apocalypse world, one person was helping them until they finally arrived. Apparently this fellow's hideout was inside a children's school, which left the protagonist wide-eyed because schools are usually terrible places to hide during a zombie apocalypse. But again, the sniper ordered to proceed, and when they entered there, they saw that there were no bodies, no blood, and no guts flying everywhere. The man then opened a door, and inside there were several children waiting for the teacher. One of the children asked who that man and that little girl were, and the teacher just told them not to worry because they are friends. Thus he began to remove his hood, and clearly this man would have pink hair, being our next waifu. Oh, how cute. And the protagonist recognized that she is a revolutionary, one of the strongest snipers in the world. Then he quickly introduced himself, as well as introduced the little girl who was right behind him, and in a way she was happy to find good people in this world. This school sheltered several children, and they have been there since the beginning of this whole chaotic era, and Joe noticed there was a very small child there as well, and Santa revealed that she found that child outside. Therefore she went to look for milk for her, and the baby ended up drinking from the bottle. She also looked at Sasha, since she had injured her arm. Then she took some medicines and healed her arm. She also handed over a blanket and the girl could sleep on the bed. And Sasha quickly crashed together with her teddy, asked our protagonist if by chance he was an evolutionist too, and upon confirmation that yes, she became very happy. After all, having strong people nearby was better. Currently she knew there were 5 evolutionists inside the city, but after all the zombies went crazy outside, she lost contact with them. Joe explained that who was behind all those zombies was the Guardian, and Sasha revealed the crystal was in the body of one of the Guardians too. In other words, they would need to fight face to face with the Guardian to be able to get this crystal. But the protagonist was caught in the middle of his thoughts because Sasha screamed that the little girl was infected in the previous fight. Her infection was from a wound, so she would not become a zombie. But still, it seemed she was suffering a lot. They needed to find medicines, but the only places that would have them would be in a hospital at the city's entrance. And the protagonist recalled that he passed by there earlier. However, Sasha said he could not go there. The zombies in that region were very scary. But the protagonist just picked Sasha up in his arms and stated that if he kills all the monsters, none of them will be so scary like that. And the girl there felt a certain chill down her spine, but cheered greatly because she liked that guy and will go with him. Thus, let's go to the hospital. And it seems that inside there were several zombies roaming around. Sasha said that the number of zombies had greatly increased, so the protagonist left the little girl with her and entered inside alone. The zombies quickly saw our big boy entering through the front door, and without any fuss, he just drew his sword, and with such a powerful posture defeated all the monsters in the blink of an eye. And Sasha was impressed. Okay, actually I already said that everyone was impressed when he draws the sword, right? The guy is really good. The protagonist asked if by any chance she knew where the pharmacy of that hospital was located. She revealed it was on the 2nd floor and would be right behind him. Thus they began to go up the escalators. Joe noticed a weapon on the floor. This seems to have been thrown from the 10th floor, meaning there is something very powerful up there. On the 2nd floor, several zombie bodies were sprawled on the ground. Fortunately, none of them were moving. They managed to reach the pharmacy they needed. Scene left the girl lying on the floor saying she was going to fetch some antibiotic, but a small fraction of light appeared above them. Cena quickly pointed her rifle, and in the direction where that light was, a large eye opened. Then she fired. The protagonist turned to see what was happening, and Cena revealed that it was a very powerful zombie above them, and the whole ceiling began to collapse because of that aberration. Then the creature was ugly and opened its mouth, sucking everything that was in the area. Each of its tentacles had several eyes around. Cena kept firing non-stop at that monster, but it seems that the target of that monster was Sasha. But before the tentacle reached her, The protagonist knocked that down, told to leave with the little girl and that he would take care of that strange aberration ahead, and began to exude his whole crimson aura. And an incredible performance was made, creating several cuts around that monster. The tentacles were cut one by one and the blood was sprayed everywhere, and that big zombie just cried out in pain. This zombie was of the mutant type and was very dangerous to fight now. It was trying to draw its attention to go away from the girls. Sina thanked for that, because she could get the medicines for the girl. Then went to the pharmacy shelf, and there on the other side, the zombie continued chasing our big boy. He was thinking how he could destroy this monster's brain while its tentacles continued pursuing our hero, and Joe began to surf on the tentacles of this big monster. With the sword in his fists, he aimed directly at the monster's head and stabbed strongly, piercing even deeper into its head. He jumped away and the blood began to gush everywhere, but it was as expected. He hit the head, but there was no brain inside, and the monster got even angrier, attacking in every possible direction. It seems he will need to find the brain of this monster in the middle of all these tentacles. Sina kept looking for the medicines, until she finally found the antibiotic she needed. Now there was only one last medicine missing so they could leave there, but she felt a huge vibration in the building and also a sense of terror. Then she aimed her weapon upwards. Sasha also began to wake up little by little. Then she stood up, but with a really weird face. It seems that Sasha was no longer there. She was walking unconsciously through the room. It was that black shadow. This was the Guardian, and he was in front of Sasha. Sina fired a shot directly at that shadow, but the shot simply went through. After all, it is a shadow. It has no physical body, so it would not be affected by her ammunition. She decided to grab Sasha's body and pull her back, but strangely, the body of the little girl was very strong, and the shadow kept staring at the little girl. Suddenly, the head of the shadow began to rebuild and a scream was given. This scream turned into a kind of song, and Sina was feeling a great sleep. Suddenly, the shadow disappeared and Sasha fell again into that deep sleep. By some luck, they managed to get rid of that Guardian monster, but because of the effect of that Guardian, the zombies outside began to rise. If she shoots him, she knows it will make a lot of noise and attract even more, and she only hoped he would return as soon as possible. Then on the roof of the hospital, the fight kept unfolding between our protagonist and that grotesque thing. It was at that same moment that our big boy heard the sound of a gunshot. Until now, he had already used 1/3 of the power of the red crystal, and it seems that he was still at a disadvantage, so not much time was left. He had to find the brain of this monster in the middle of all those tentacles, but if he cannot find it, he will simply cut them all again. And he delivered several slashing blows on top of all the tentacles of this zombie. He cut the tentacles so faithfully that only one strike was enough, and the monster opened its mouth once again with the shrill scream, and Joe delivered a gigantic blow in the direction of that monster, and the big beast just fell backwards with the scream and also a cry. Maybe it is coincidence, but the brain could be hidden in the last tentacle. In the end, he just left a monster already fallen on the ground there and needed to return to the scene. But suddenly the tentacles began to form once again, and a head appeared from the middle of all that. This time there were much smaller and sharper tentacles, and the expression of this zombie was much more provocative. This seemed to be the true appearance, and the protagonist was already right behind this head that began to scream in fury. But he just gave a smile while raising his sword and used the spiritual explosion upon that monster. And he sliced it with 2 clean cuts, and the beast just fell to the ground already obliterated. Joe had to praise since it was parasitizing that huge monster. For sure, this spent a lot of his time and almost confused him. He also gave thanks because this fight made his crystal evolve. His fortification increased even more, since his crystal managed to break through a much greater limit, and now he needed to go meet Sina. And speaking of her, she was aiming her ammunition. She had only 16 bullets in the magazine, and a total of 33 enemies. Then she aimed at the enemies extremely delicately, placed the weapon on her shoulder, and again faced the head of a zombie entering her sight. That way she pulled the trigger and fired. This same shot eliminated 3 zombies at once, and several other shots were fired to eliminate the rest, but now she had only 1 ammunition left. However, it was the same moment that the protagonist managed to arrive on the scene with a jump from above. Sana was happy after all, she was already at her limit too. Quickly she turned to the other side and eliminated another zombie, and the protagonist was very proud that this girl was really very good. And she managed to notice that Joe returned much stronger after having eliminated that mutant. He also asked her to save ammunition, because he will take care of the rest of the monsters. He wanted to test how strong his body became after absorbing the power of that zombie. He sped through the entire room, wiping out all the zombies that were there. This was his new ability, the Burst, which consumed all the power that was inside the crystal. For normal enemies like these, he did not need to use the Burst. Sina asked if they were all eliminated, because the hospital was in tremendous silence now, and she also found all the medicines they needed. She also told that they encountered the Guardian, but he ended up escaping. Then, minutes later, they returned to the shelter, and Sasha already seemed to be much better after the application of the medicines. Then, she just crashed on the bed once again. Joe asked the girl to go rest because he would guard the school, and she just thanked while leaning against a wall with her weapon and fists, and not many seconds later she already collapsed due to tiredness. But then she woke up and it seems that the dawn had already passed and the protagonist was there, but he made a gesture to stay silent because the zombies were in the region of the school, and when Sina went to face the glass they were right above them. She found it strange that they invaded precisely this place at this time in the morning. According to Joe, if they don't make noise, these zombies will go away soon. That seemed to be a good idea. Then Sina just passed by the children. But one of the little ones suddenly screamed and began to cry, and this was a really bad situation. She just stared at the child and went straight to her, and obviously the zombies that were outside heard this noise and ran completely ecstatic inside. They invaded the door and began to descend the stairs. She asked what they should do now. Wouldn't Joe kill those zombies? After all, could they attract the Guardian and many more of them invade? Sasha woke up saying that she could go. After all, the Guardian is not after her. She even said she was fine. Her body was recovering. Joe told her not to strain. After all, the girl was all limping. Go ahead. After all, it is just the zombies not looking directly at her face. Then, in a flash of speed, she left the room and went up the stairs, exterminating all the zombies in the way, including all those who were outside as well. Sina was a bit jealous, saying that she was also very good. After all, she and the hospital managed to eliminate several zombies with little ammunition. Then, let's go to the outside on the daycare roof. He recalled from the past life that this area was taken by the zombies after many months, and they managed to obtain the evolution crystal. Sina arrived asking what was going through our hero's mind, and he replied that by the progress, in a week all the survivors of this area would be dead. Because of that, Sana went to communicate with the other people in the region, but she could not get any contact. She had been trying to communicate for hours and no one answered. The protagonist warned that they would need to defeat this Guardian before that week ended, but Sana saw that Guardian in person. He was extremely strong. Joe told not to worry because the areas of evolutions are formed by human stories and myths, so they needed to know who this enemy was. First they need to return and organize all the information they have. Then, hours later, the Guardian lost his abilities when the sun was setting, and the stronger zombies also stopped. In other words, during the night, the Guardian has the ability only to control the weaker zombies, besides the fact that he has an ability to put people into a deep sleep. Sina asked why the little girl did not fall asleep that day as well, and the protagonist revealed that, actually, he is different from her. His body is special. They guessed that maybe it was because of the girl's age. When he looked directly at the Guardian, he could see several children around him. Sina was frightened because this Guardian could be kidnapping the children, which was strange for Joe because the Guardian's power came from the crystal, so he did not need to kidnap children. The Guardians have rules, just like the phoenix that was guarding the pyramid, and there are many myths and folklore of monsters that eat children, and he asked if they knew any. Sina said that that image seemed to be of a man, besides the fact that she heard a song when she stared directly at the figure. Sasha also revealed that she saw him using a flute, and the protagonist kept thinking what kind of situation this was. A man with a flute and several children around could only be the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and the two girls had no idea who that was. This is an old story, where a city called Hamelin was infested with rats. Then a piper appeared from the middle of the forest, saying he could get rid of them, but he would demand a compensation from the city. The piper guided all the rats with his melody to the nearby river and drowned them all. When he returned to the city, the people refused to pay him. As a form of revenge, the piper returned to the city and hypnotized all the children to the river, and that is precisely why in the middle of the city there is a great river passing through. The zombies were like the rats, who were manipulated during the day, and at night the children were manipulated too. And since he had to use abilities like this, it meant that his combat was weak. But still, it was a headache to have to face the enemy who could hypnotize others and turn into a shadow. Sasha was convinced she would be the bait to manage to find this enemy, but Senna did not like it. This was really very dangerous. The protagonist said the same thing. The Guardian was already aware that the three were strong. In other words, he will create a trap, and she was a little disappointed, wondering what she could do now. Joe also knew that he could not wait too long. They had to create a trap for that Guardian as soon as possible. But better than falling into that Guardian's trap, they will create their own trap, and hunt him during this night. That same dawn, in another place, a man shouted that the zombies had moved away, and they should leave now. They should hunt everything they could inside, be it weapons or food. One of the men warned his leader that Senna was trying to contact them, and the man was moved. After all, she was alone during all the zombie attacks, and right behind was our dynamic duo, and PK wondered if by chance Senna had found a companion in the middle of this city. And the protagonist knew exactly who that man was, so he extended his hands to PK. But he told him to stop joking. Just the two of them would not be able to kill the Guardian. Panji looked at Senna and asked if she could defeat the Guardian with just one shot. The protagonist showed a little paper with information about the Guardian, and if they were right, they would work together and thus succeed in defeating him. But PK asked how he could trust the two if this could simply be a trap. The whole group was irritated. After all, they knew they would be used only as meat shields. But it was at this moment that the protagonist intervened and showed his dominant aura. They could not understand why that man had so much pressure and his eyes were also in red. Even PK, the leader of this group, noticed that our protagonist was simply grand. Joe only warned that the rest could handle the weaker zombies, because the guardian was his. Again, PK told him to stop joking. It was very difficult to face a guardian, but still he wanted to test Joe's strength. And the protagonist only said that he was making a big mistake and told everyone to go at him all at once. After all, it will be much easier to defeat them all and show his strength. In this way, the whole group began to speak several swear words and went against our big boy. PK jumped over with the axe in hands, and Sena was scared because PK was also a very powerful evolutionist. But his axe was simply held with a single hand. He could not move even using his maximum strength. And then he was sent flying into the air, and the protagonist faced him flying and only gave a smack with the sheath of his sword on his head, and already made the man fall to the ground unconscious. The others were very scared to see so much strength like that, wondering who the hell this man was, and he had also disappeared out of nowhere. Tane Muste is a Dinnerone. He's sure he's like in raison claquant conducted with this in force. And it is not that he disappeared, he was right behind those men who challenged him. And each of them took the blow directly on their nape, and he managed to stun all the men who were left on the ground. Minutes later, PK ended up getting up with a huge pain in his body and really confirmed that our big boy was the protagonist of this story. Joe also warned that the other men would wake up soon. There was no need to worry. Then he extended his hands asking if he had changed his mind, and seeing so much strength, of course he had changed. Then he asked about the wacky plan to defeat that guardian. Joe revealed that the guardian should be preparing a trap since they failed to fight him the day before, and they would have to fight at least 100 enemies at once. PK turned to his group and began to count, and it seemed to be a huge responsibility to put all these men to fight against 100 enemies at once. Joe also stated that they did not need to defeat the enemies, but only delay them. PK knew there would be deaths. After all, it was not possible to fight a horde of zombies and run out of nowhere. The bet was simple. They needed to defeat this guardian in one night, otherwise the zombies would become berserkers the next morning. Sena intervened because all the other teams did not answer her call, that is, they could already have been eliminated. PK understood and became furious. After all, they need to deal with this guardian before everything becomes even more creepy. He shouted to his team how everyone was feeling, and they shouted that they were excited, exploding with emotion to get out of this place as soon as possible. In this way, once again he gave his hands to the protagonist, confirming that they would go with this plan, and Joe had a kind of dumb face. After all, he had just been called a leader too. The two girls were whispering about the plans they would also have to take. In this way, they began to climb the stairs. Our protagonist was outside alone waiting for the guardian to appear and asked if Sasha would be fine without Joe by her side. And at first she was wonderfully well. She would fulfill her part in the plan. On the outside, let's go to a car running at high speed. Sasha left the car when she felt a shuddering aura. PK could feel that that was the power of the guardian. He gave a piece of metal pipe in the girl's hands, and she was in front of a big building. Then she just began to climb the floors alone. She sat in a chair at a university table, and she could feel that something big was coming. Not far from there, and watching everything was our big guy. He could see the guardian right behind with a herd of zombies. Then, really, that big monster came to meet Sasha, and the girl was alone in the middle of that whole room. Then, the pencil ended up slipping from the table, and when it fell to the ground it made an extremely loud noise. Sasha ended up picking up that small pencil and stared in front of the board and recalled the moments when she was inside a classroom with her friends. Then, the clock in the middle of the room struck midnight. At that same instant, the flute of Hamelin began to play. The girl was completely hypnotized in a matter of seconds. Then, she was guided by this sound, and while she walked, that iron pipe hit the ground and made a metallic noise. This made Sasha awaken from that hypnosis. The protagonist said that in the story of Hamelin, only children who possessed iron pipes could escape, and Sasha kept being guided by this sound. On the outside, PK ordered his men to begin the ambush. Not far away, Sena fired with her rifle. Several zombies began to appear, including the shadow itself. Those men started running into the forest. They only had to delay these monsters, but PK was fighting with everything he had. He stated to the others that if they did not fight, they would probably die today. Thus the men turned and began to shoot with their weapons. Then, one by one, the zombies began to fall, but one of them said there were too many enemies, they could not stay there forever. And this group was chasing Sasha, who was walking through the forest. One of the zombies was advancing directly at the little girl, but she was not hypnotized and landed a right jab on the zombie's head. And what strength, huh, girl? She sent the big beast flying into the air, and the creature just fell on the ground unconscious. And PK was wrong. How could that girl need his protection if she was stronger than him? The other men were also convinced they needed to protect that little girl. Sina was seeing that everything was going according to plan, but still she was apprehensive because she wanted to get closer to her companions. But she could not stop firing and had to keep the enemies away from Sasha. In the middle of the forest, that black shadow began to sing even louder. This piercing sound began to spread throughout the whole city. PK and Sasha were already on the ground, bewildered by the music. Sina had also dropped her rifle, and it seemed that aiming was difficult now. The only one in condition to fight was our hero. And the Guardian was trying to use the sound of the flute to control our big boy as well, but yes, he had the ability to fight this enemy. By using the spiritual explosion, the figure of the Sphinx appeared over the flutist, who quickly got startled, and then undid all this musical control around, and showed his true form. And Joe only praised because that creature was uglier in person, and that now his mental attacks would no longer work on anyone. And for seeming a guardian, he looked extremely weak. So now they will fight. But the zombie returned with all that shadow around him, and several shadowy whips began to come out of his body. All of them tried to hit our Joe, and in the middle of so many attacks, our protagonist managed to observe well. What was in the middle of all that dark power were the bodies of the children. An enchanted hand came out of there and grabbed the legs of the protagonist, but without thinking much, he soon used his sword to cut that hand. Going to the other group, they began to get up and saw that the zombies were still lying down. It seemed that Joe was managing to fight against the Guardian. Sasha shouted that she could feel the power of her brother, and they should run to help him, and PK ordered the same thing. They had to help their leader. Now the protagonist needed to jump up onto a building, since around him a river began to take even more form. Instinctively, he knew he could not touch this black river. And honestly, if I see a river like that with a demonic face down there, I would not touch it either, okay? And from the middle of all that water rose a great, gigantic, monumental, monstrous zombie. It seemed that all the zombies in that city had joined into a single body. That seemed to be the ability that the evolution crystal was giving to this monster. If they did not defeat this zombie now, it could even become a catastrophe class. That monumental monster punched the building where protagonist was, and he needed to jump. Upon touching the ground, he used his strength increase due to the red crystal, and hurled a metal beam in the direction of the monster that hit its head squarely. He began to throw even more beams that were around. All of them hit and pierced that giant, who suddenly began to vomit even more water. And from all this water began to fall even more zombies onto the protagonist. Joe grabbed another beam and hurled it with full strength upwards. He took advantage and also used the water current that monster was pouring out. And with all the strength, the head of that monster was exploded into several little pieces. And who was on his shoulder was the Guardian. Joe had no time to lose, so he advanced right forward. The Guardian began to play his flute, and from this music several stakes began to emerge from the waters. But none of this would stop our hero, who defeated all the stakes and jumped up at the Guardian, telling him to die right now. A crimson lightning crossed the skies. The civilians who were around could observe all this chaotic scene. The men who were under the command of the protagonist were also observing this, and Senna knew that this was Joe's power. Everyone could see a great crimson dragon rising to the skies. That same overwhelming force advanced directly onto the flutist, who tried to defend himself using the flute right in front of him, but it was completely broken by the blade of our big boy, who also managed to use Lai's stance and cut the Guardian into two pieces. And by doing so, a great explosion arose and the Guardian was completely obliterated. A pillar of energy began to rise to the skies and shook the whole city. Sasha could not believe in so much power appearing there. That was because our hero was levitating in the middle of the air. He seemed to be being devoured by this light. All this light also went over Sena, and later to the people who helped our big boy in the middle of this whole incursion. Everyone felt that the heat of this light was their victory. All the civilians around also felt that now they could survive a little longer. The crystal was now selecting people who helped the protagonist or dealt some damage to the Guardian. It seemed that the crystal had a kind of intelligence and would give power to those people who helped. And quickly Joe grabbed that crystal to see the abilities it would provide. In this way, 3 ability spheres appeared to choose from. The first was from the flutist, to use sound as a mental control. The second was to create mutants using his own power. But none of these abilities seemed to be so good for the protagonist. The ability to transform into a black shadow was also not so bad, so he decided to choose exactly this ability. Upon touching it, it began to rise to the skies and explode in flames, and a voice congratulated him for obtaining the substance of the black shadows. This ability was certainly much better than the others that the Guardian had. Then he faced the horizon because now this city was freed from the evolution area. Returning to the city of Zhang, some soldiers were reporting that a mutant was heading towards the base and everyone was worried and had to call reinforcements to fight. But the captain stated no. After all, only a god could save him at this moment. And the soldiers looked out the window and the mutant arrived at them and was grabbing the building. The captain ordered everyone to jump as soon as possible and leave there, and when it was his turn to manage to jump, the building began to collapse. The soldiers turned to help their captain. That was because the debris fell on top of him and he could no longer move, and right in front of him, the big zombie stomped hard on the ground. The soldiers were shooting with everything they could to save their captain, and the monster raised its hands to grab the captain. But at that instant, his body began to fly, and who appeared was truly a divinity to them. Chia was there. She stared fixedly at that monster. Then, using the power of gravity, she collided him to the ground with maximum force, and the big monster simply disappeared, turning into dust. I think that's it. If they didn't forget to draw the monster there in the middle. And it seems that the situation was resolved. Now she approached the soldiers, stating she was from the Special Operations Area of the city of Shang. The captain thanked Chia immensely for the help, but asked if that monster had really been eliminated. She asked him not to worry because she had used at least 10 times the force of gravity to crush that monster's brain. Chia was gradually managing to control her gravitational power. Maybe that way she was getting closer and closer to the standard of that guy. At this moment, her communicator was activated, and they reported that the evolution area of the city of DGA was concluded. And we're done for now, gang. And let me tell you that I'm reading this work non-stop, huh? It mixes everything I like, zombies and special powers. And tell me if you're enjoying it too, besides not forgetting to like this video and subscribe to the channel.